In this session, we're going to look at how we as leaders can transform ourselves into different levels of consciousness and awareness and capability to fit those huge changes going on in the world around us. So if our civilization, if our species is going through a paradigm shift in the operating system, which underpins how we work, to a networked operating system from an enterprise operating system, then what does that mean for us as leaders? What do we have to do? Well, we know to cope with this ruthless, radical, relentless complexity and change, we must improve our sense-making and decision-making capabilities. But this comes through upgrading our consciousness. Remember, we have seen that our consciousness, how we run our inner body and mind, directly relates to our competence as leaders, managers, and as organizations. And we can't outperform the consciousness of ourselves as leaders for very long, no matter how good our technology, no matter how good our access to cash. Remember, WeWork went from being roughly $50 billion business to less than a fifth of that. It's now worth less than the money that was put inside it. It had access to money, it had access to technology, it had access to every human it wanted to employ pretty much. But what it didn't seem to have is the capacity of leadership consciousness, right? And this links back to that law that we saw, that's the law of networks, the law of requisite variety, which says organizations and individuals with the highest level of variety in our responses to the world will have the most success in ever more various complex systems. So if our world is becoming networked out there, then what does that look like for us? What's a networked consciousness? Well, we saw that in the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, we don't want to be thinking in a lame way, in a linear way, linear, additive, mechanistic, and efficient. That's worked really well in a stable, familiar, predictable, clear environment. But in a VUCA environment, we want to be adaptable, creative, connected, and effective, right? ACE, because ACE allows us to adapt, innovate, and transform. Now, back to the neuroscience of creativity. So one of the neuroscientists that we looked at their work, it's a mistake to think that artists are born that way. Just as it learns anything else, the brain has to learn how to do creativity. We have to learn how to do transformation. We have to learn how to be transformative to be transformational leaders. Now, the one thing that's slightly interesting about this is as children, we seem to be really good at creating connect mode, right? We seem to be really good at connecting with random kids in a playground. Put two children and some building blocks together and they'll probably start connecting and creating, right? But over time, necessarily, we have to stop being so creative and chaotic and spending all our time just playing. We have to start learning how to do chores, or what we call at home cares. We have to take care of our washing, our plates, our food, our clothes, our bodies. And so necessarily we do, as we become adults, transition to a more, we have more patterns, more learning, more habits, more success practices. However, our current schooling system in this mechanistic, capitalist enterprise OS world actually pulls us right over here. We get taught how to do the right answer, not to think of creative thoughts and reflect on a difficult world. That is changing, thankfully, but still at a very slow rate. Then we go and do management training and MBAs and on-the-job training, which tell us also how to do the right strategy, the right plans. Here's the case study. Though that thankfully also is changing. And then we've seen that adverse childhood experiences, trauma, can lock us into hypervigilance, hyperthreat, hyperstress, which locks us into using old patterns, old thinking, old beliefs, tunnel vision, tunnel memory all the time in order to control the inherent complex world and the chaos and protect ourselves. So we get wedged up right into control and protect mode. And that works to get the job done. It works to hustle. It works for spreadsheet management. It works for project plans. It works for delivering efficiencies on the production line or on the front line where we take care of customers or users. But it doesn't work very well when someone says, now we have to adapt our business model because of climate change, because of the hybrid workplace, because of the pandemic, because of any number of other issues. So we have in childhood a very plastic system. Remember the idea of neuroplasticity? Our brains are very plastic when they're young. They're developing lots of different connections every day. Lots of connectivity between all the different parts of the brain. But the brain's also quite chaotic. Has to think through everything all the time. It's very resource intensive, very energy intensive. And we're constantly experimenting and therefore quite often wrong. And we're also emotionally quite labile, as in changeable, but also quite agile. We can move around our emotions, and often that's quite a lot because we cry a lot, or we have outbursts quite a lot. Meltdowns. And then in adulthood, we have a more fixed brain. We've got more successful patterns that work, protective patterns. We have stronger connections. We've built myelin sheaths between big highways around being smart or being effective or being productive or being funny or whatever we've learned how to do to cope, but a lot less connectivity. Overall, we don't spend much time on experimentation. Most of our time spent on planning, which is that control function. And we've got hopefully some emotional stability. At least we may have locked down our emotions so they don't destabilize us and derail us every day. And we're super focused on efficiency. And so if we are too far calibrated on the left, then part of our development as leaders is to find how to be childlike again as adults. Not childish. We don't want to be petty and vindictive and emotionally reactive and have lots of meltdowns. We want to be able to play more. We want to be able to experiment and co-create more. So this is now in the realm of what is called adult development theory. How do we develop as adults? And lots of research has happened over the last few years, 50, 60 years in psychology and neuroscience, philosophy, about how are there sort of a typical maturity levels, consciousness upgrades that happen as adults. And lots of great thinkers like these people have been studying cohorts of kids, teenagers, adults, to try and understand what is possible for the adult mind and consciousness to inhabit. How much can we upgrade ourselves over our lifestyle? How mature can we be? And what does maturity even look like? And then there's some philosophers who have been looking at some of these areas too. These are some of them. What happens when we evolve our consciousness as adults, as leaders? And you'll notice that most of these people are men. Most of this has been done in academia. So there's been a focus on adult development in the terms of intellectual development, as opposed to wisdom and some of, let's say, the more feminine qualities of relationships and care. That's not unanimously the case. That's been a tendency in adult development. So we're going to look at some of our thinking at Switch on some of this work around where can we go as leaders? What can happen to us? Just a warning about all adult development work. They're very powerful to see these stages that we can inhabit, these sort of levels of consciousness, if you like, but they can also be very easily misused to be elitist and to look down on people, say, oh, you're not mature enough, you're not evolved enough as I am. So they're often used to judge people, norm people, well, you're not normal for your age, to exclude people, to prescribe what should be done, to proscribe people, to exclude them. And we must never use them for this job. We should use them for ourselves, as leaders, to challenge ourselves, to provoke ourselves, maybe to preempt crises that might happen at different transitions between different stages. Just as the crisis we're going through now as a world is a stage transition crisis. It's a phase transition crisis. What happens when we go from enterprise to network? Well, it doesn't look good. Why? Because we know that the transformation curve means that things go down into chaos before they come out. And we don't like this chaos that we're feeling, this sort of unraveling of the world. And we don't really have many leaders showing us that there's going to be an upside up the transformation curve. So we don't like crises. It doesn't feel good. So we want to use all this kind of thinking compassionately, mainly for ourselves, always knowing that we're works in progress, right? So all our axes and stages that we work about are not literal, they're idealized, they're figurative, metaphorical. So don't worry about exactly where you are or what you're doing. We've all got tensions and contradictions. We all are sometimes more mature in some areas and less mature in others. And all the stages, I believe, that we might go through, levels, are necessary and beautiful, but they also might not be exactly the right order. There's just a stylized way of looking at things as a kind of order of expansion and maturity. But some are more appropriate for our age and our roles in the world than others. So in biotransformation theory and practice, we use the 4 H's. Remember, hara, interoceptive intelligence, felt sense; heart, emotions, emotional intelligence; head, thoughts, behaviors, ideas, beliefs, assumptions, insights, which is cognitive intelligence; and then behaviors, hands, behaviors, which is practical intelligence, getting stuff done to time, to budget, to quality. So what that then allows us to do is go, okay, so we have this quite deep emotional felt sense way of feeling into situations, and we also have a mental and practical way of dealing with situations. So you can then create 2 axes. So you've got cognitive behavioral complexity. So we become more and more developed, more mature, more evolved in our consciousness, particularly in how we think and act in the world to solve more complex problems. And then we also have a form of development of growth, maturity, evolution, which you can call interoceptive affective complexity. So that's interoception and affect, which is emotion complexity, how we sense and feel in the world to care for more complex relationships. So one is about solving problems. One is about caring and tending for relationships. Now, obviously, you can already tell that the cognitive behavioral complexity part of development is the one that we are most aware of usually. Most of our schooling is based around that. Most of our management training is based upon that. And then there's this other part of complexity around how we feel and sense into our relationships. So if you put those into 2 axes, just to create insight, they're not true. It's just a model, a map to create some coherence, to help us think and act and feel and develop better. So we've got cognitive behavioral complexity here, and we had interoceptive affective complexity there. So there's a vertical aspect around intellect and intelligence and more traditional understandings of complexity. We can call it cognitive complexity. We call it shorthand insightful action. Can we have insightful action in the world? And then we have this interoceptive affective complexity, which is a horizontal aspect. So we may not be brilliant at solving complex problems, but we're really good at tending to relationships. Taking care is a really important piece of that form of complexity, that form of intelligence. So looking at the vertical axis briefly, we've got insightful action. So what's that about? Well, as we develop ourselves consciously as leaders, we can take on ever more complex problems and execute the solutions effectively. It's not always efficient because we might have to develop some new ideas and innovate, which is inefficient, but it's effective. So that's insightful action. It's usually a function of intellect, acumen, old form, the traditional intelligence, performance, power, entrepreneurialism, etc. These are just some of the things that we might want to learn how to do, just to give you a flavor of this form of cognitive behavioral complexity. So improving processes, sharing best practice, discipline and destruction testing, reframing problems, critical thinking from different angles, scientific method, how to do science, how to collect, read and analyze data, big data, looking for insight within data and flexing the insight, deconstructing different claims to truth, understanding power relations, power dynamics, looking at how to leverage logic and reason, but also narrative, how complex adaptive systems work, whether it's the human heart, the human brain, the human body, our organizations, or the global finance system, interventions, how they work, what works well, what doesn't, cognitive biases, spotting cognitive biases, risk and uncertainty, which we cover in one of the sessions, as well as biases, quant versus qual research, linear versus nonlinear thinking, and innovation process. That's all kind of part of this vertical axis. So putting that on the axis, we might be able to initially, when we're quite young or entering the workforce or at school, understand a simple process challenge and then be told how to do it well, and then make that how you do things. So maybe stacking the dishwasher as a teenager. It might be passing your maths exam. And then it might be working in your first job on a production line, or my first job working for a fast food restaurant, learning how to fry fries quickly, effectively, and so they taste good. Then we start to understand how to solve complicated technical problems. So we might do training in supply chain management or HR or architecture or physics. And we can then apply technical problems because we're now an expert. We can apply technical solutions with expert thinking, and they're complicated, but we know how to do it. Then we start to be able to understand complex challenges, which usually almost invariably need creative solutions. We start to be able to innovate. Then we might be able to start understanding complex, systemic, multi-system, stakeholder challenges. And that's where we get transformational solutions. And then maybe we can expand and understand planetary or cosmic challenges. Maybe it's climate change or how our planet interacts with other planets. With regenerative solutions, that's a question mark. It's a hypothesis. So this is us consciously choosing to become more complex in our thinking and acting. Now, this quote is from a book about why so many, the author calls them incompetent men become leaders. Men tend to think that they are much smarter than women, yet arrogance and overconfidence are inversely related to leadership talent. The ability to build and maintain high-performing teams and to inspire followers to set aside their selfish agendas in order to work for the common good of the group. Interesting. So being clever and being able to execute solutions is not enough to make us good leaders, to be able to bring teams together and bring collaboration together and to get over our desires to look after our own self and our own profit, status, promotion, KPIs, to work together. So what is missing from this idea of power and intelligence and confidence and extroversion? Well, we've already talked about it. It's creativity, wisdom, connection, relationships, tending to relationships. So that's where we look at a different axis that we were called interoceptive, affective complexity, or shorthand embodied wisdom. So for us, embodied wisdom is about caring about ever more complex relationships and the suffering within them, the schisms, the trauma, the difficulties, the conflicts, the wounding, the old patterning, the breakdowns, and tending to those problems in our relationships empathically, compassionately, but also intelligently, so we can bring people and groups together, get them through conflict, build more trust, getting through the conflicts. And as we do that, we become more wise. And it's embodied wisdom because we can do it in our bodies. We bring people together. We hold space for relationships to repair and restore and regenerate. This is a function of compassion, wholeness, our own wholeness. Have we tending to our own wounds in our understanding of ourself at the very core of our being? It's about empowerment, stability, integrating change over time, and maturing from into our wisest version of ourselves. So we have a smart version, insightful action, and we have a wise version. And we believe that we want to do both as leaders. So embodied wisdom are things like apologizing quickly and effectively and meaningfully, regulating our emotions, becoming awareness of our bodies and our spaciousness within our bodies and when we don't feel spacious, making progress, healing our own wounds, owning our own part of a problem with alacrity. We looked at that in ownership. Can I just go, you know what? I own my 100% of the 50% of the conflict. Totally. Because I'm not blaming myself. I'm just curious as to why I have that pattern and how it occurs. So it's about integrity and trust in relationships. It's about compassionate boundaries. It's not free for all. Being wise isn't saying everyone can just splurge over me, their emotions. I'm going to splurge over everyone else. Clear and compassionate, semi-permeable boundaries. We let stuff in, but we also hold integrity in space and go, you know what? That stuff is not mine. That's yours. I could support you with it. I can't take it on. It's about reciprocity and co-creativity and networks. It's about being able to sense the room when we walk into a meeting, feel the music of an entire organization or a system or a sector. Treating people equally even though they might have different values within the hierarchy, holding space for innovation, transformation, group coming togetherness, about presence, attunement, about to mirror people, building rapport, being open-hearted and kind, even when people we don't like or feel don't like us. We're not as interested in being powerful, cool, and brilliant as we are in being kind and listening. We are interested in empowerment rather than power over. We have humility as well as hubris. We are aware of our own biases and patterning. We can be challenged and coached, but not always take everything on. We don't have to take every bit of feedback on. And we can also nurture weak ties and bring in people, and we can anticipate weak signals of the future and the present, which is a topic of a whole session of its own. So what that means is we end up with 5 areas that are now we call the 5 biotransformation theory and practice Gem 5 is the 5 relational fields that we want to make sure we have coherence, integrity, and wholeness in. This may not happen sequentially, but they look sequentially about my relationship with myself. Can I care for myself emotionally, physically, physiologically, psychologically, with connection, reconnection, with connection to my heart, connection to breathing, connection to something meaningful, a source of love and connection and purpose and compassion? Can I care for others in my team, my intimate relationships, my business partners, my senior leadership team, my family, close friends? Can I be vulnerable with them? But can I sacrifice my own comforts and conveniences for other people on occasions to take care of the group? Now can I take care for my community, my company, my organization with courage and responsibility? Take on the problems and metabolize them into solutions for the community. Can I care for all people? Can I care for the human race, the human experience with purpose? Can I use my organization to deliver purpose for the whole of humanity, particularly in these challenging times? And can I care for the planet or the cosmos as a whole, nature? Can I care for nature with a sense of surrender because it's bigger than me, and humility as well? So we can consciously develop this as well, particularly by expanding and repairing these relational fields and saying, you know what, I'm really good with myself. I've got a lot of self-love, but I find small groups difficult. Or I find small groups brilliant, but I find I'm not really connected to society as a whole or my organization as a whole. I feel unseen by society or unseen by companies or my boss. So in my last book, Now Lead the Change, about transformational leadership, I say this: without developing a healing heart to match our expanding mind, we can easily become systemic genii with stellar thoughts, but never think to ask anyone about their experiences or feelings. We can become cognitively brilliant gurus, but who we sleep with our employees and abuse our power. We can become finance wizards, but who are alienated from the impact of our finances on nature, on society, or disruptive innovators who think nothing of crushing every competitor in their path of world domination. So if we put those together, we get a kind of stylized, figurative set of stages that we can develop as transformational leaders. It's not the truth, remember. It's just a view, a lens that can give us some insights into our own journey when we might be stuck. So we're a contributor to an organization. We come in at the bottom usually, and we contribute to whatever's needed. Then we become an achiever. We're given projects, we're given KPIs, we're given profit and loss responsibilities, and we can achieve best practice and make things excellent. Then hopefully we might be thinking, well, there's stuff that isn't working in the company, particularly in the way the world's changing or in our market as a whole, and I want to innovate some products and services that fit the world better. Then we start thinking, well, it's not just about being brilliant with my ideas, it's about also transforming the world. So we want to have purpose in the heart of our ideas, which changes everything about innovation, because most innovation is about productivity and profit. But when we start doing purpose-led innovation, we start transforming ourselves, our organizations, and the world by the nature of having purpose-led creativity. And then do we become an elder, a regenerator? We're no longer at the beginning, no longer at the head of projects. We're no longer holding systems change, but we're still there to guide when people want our support. And we're there to pass on knowledge and pass on wisdom. As we move up this hypothetical set of stages, we become ever more able to lead and land, implement, execute transformation. And I posit that within this system, there is a threshold whereby we can't be more insightful actors in terms of solving complex problems with effective solutions without developing our emotional intelligence. I think we've seen that. We can't really become transformational just with ideas and with genius and with brilliance. We have to also listen to others and understand and care for relationships. And likewise, maybe we can't really care for ever more expanded relationships without also developing our intellectual and behavioral competencies. So we might be a brilliant therapist or a brilliant salesperson or a brilliant relational expert, essentially, who can care for relationships. But if we want to take care of an entire organization or a society or a system, we also have to get really good at being effective with our time, being effective with ideas, being effective with innovation. So I believe there can be no genuine transformational solutions without resolutions in our embodied resolutions of stuff that used to block us and now we have dealt with. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." I mean, that's beautiful. So my language, cognitive genius, cognitive complexity without embodied wisdom can be reckless and abusive, crushing the competition, killing other people to get more money and power. But embodied wisdom without power, without intelligence, without ability to do stuff is sentimental and anemic. So cognitive complexity, insightful action is at its best when it's implementing embodied wisdom, and embodied wisdom at its best. And justice at its best is insightful action, correcting everything that stands in the way of relationships, love, purpose, connection, hope, equality, justice, community, etc. So just putting that into this understanding, as our embodied wisdom expands, all our ideas, our innovations, our genius business models are grounded, sourced, and rooted in caring and connection for other human beings and maybe all life. And cognitive complexity expands when we become able to engage and solve ever more complex problems in the world. And just so we're really clear, as we've talked about developmental challenges, which get in the way of our self-leadership and our team leadership, trauma, adverse childhood experiences, hang-ups that create protective patterns that sabotage ourselves and diminish our people we lead. Such schisms in ourselves, such difficult moments, such wounding, such emotional hooks block the evolution of ourselves as transformational leaders. They tether us. These emotional wounds tether us in stages of development that our mind may have overworked past. We may be brilliant at understanding the complex system, and yet if we can't show up in relational harmony with others, as that author said, we'll be brilliant technically, but we won't be great leaders because we can't bring people with us and we can't create collaborative groups of people. But the great news is, as the premise of this whole program and all our work in transformation leadership, we can transform everything because we have the innate capacity to grow, develop, and evolve because we are organisms, not algorithms. So self-reflection, engagement, thinking about what I've just said about developmental stages, developmental evolution of ourselves. If right now there was a kind of upgrade happening for you as a leader, what area might it be in? Thinking back about the different levels of development, the different kind of relational fields, self, other, large groups, society, the whole world, cosmos. Where might you be called into an upgrade in how you relate or how you engage in complex problems between complicated technical issues or complex organizational, systemic issues? Where might you be in being invited into an upgrade of your consciousness as a leader.